What if science steps too far? What if in the pursuit of knowledge, humanity loses its compass? In today's video, we're peeling back the curtain on 10 scientific and psychological experiments where boundaries were crossed, and not just by mistake. These weren't benevolent mishaps. These were ethical disasters. From deliberately infecting people with deadly diseases to editing human embryos without consent, each case may shock you, but importantly, each teaches a vital lesson. Science without ethics can do lasting harm. Stick around as we walk through these chilling chapters of history. You might be surprised how many of them aren't ancient history, but disturbingly recent. Number 1. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. Let's start with a decades-long abuse of trust. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service launched a study in Macon County, Alabama, targeting black sharecroppers with untreated syphilis. They were told they were receiving free medical care, yet penicillin, the standard cure since the 1940s, was withheld. The result? Dozens died, spouses unknowingly infected, and children born with congenital syphilis. From 1932 to 1972, 40 years, the study continued simply to observe the untreated progression of the disease. Even after penicillin became widely accepted and available, researchers chose not to administer it. Instead, participants were merely observed as syphilis took its toll. It took pressure from journalists to end it, and a presidential apology didn't come until 1997. The fallout? Radical changes in bioethics, including the 1979 Belmont Report and the creation of institutional review boards, or IRBs, to safeguard participants. This study is nothing short of cruelty. Number 2. The Guatemala STD Experiments, 1946 to 1948. Next, a lesser-known but deeply disturbing experiment. In post-World War II Guatemala, U.S. researchers, working under the Public Health Service and the Rockefeller Foundation, deliberately exposed vulnerable populations to sexually transmitted infections. Prisoners, psychiatric patients, soldiers, and orphans were infected with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid without informed consent. The stated goal? To test prophylaxis and treatment methods. In many cases, subjects received no explanation, or worse, were misled. The experiments were conducted from 1946 to 1948, yet remained secret until a 2010 scholarly revelation and a 2011 U.S. Presidential Commission report which called the studies ethically impossible. Victims were intentionally infected. Some were treated, others were not. These experiments betrayed every principle of respect, autonomy, and non-maleficence. They laid bare how vulnerable groups can become collateral damage in the name of research, and spurred renewed global emphasis on consent, transparency, and oversight. Number 3. Unit 731, Japan, 1930s to 1945. Now on to one of history's most horrific chapters, Japan's Unit 731. Operating during the 1930s through the end of World War II, this covert Japanese military unit performed biological warfare research on live human subjects, primarily Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. Think vivisection without anesthesia, deliberate infection with plague, anthrax, and other pathogens, frostbite experiments, forced abortions, and extensive weapons testing. Victims weren't subjects. They were tortured and killed in the name of science. Estimates suggest thousands died or were left mutilated. After Japan's defeat, many Unit 731 researchers escaped prosecution in exchange for their data, which the U.S. reportedly used in its own biological weapons efforts. The medical atrocities here stand in a league of their own. No consent, no oversight, no humanity. Just calculated cruelty, sanctioned by wartime ambition. Number 4. CIA Project MK-Ultra, 1953 to 1970s. Fast forward to the Cold War, and we find Project MK-Ultra, CIA-run experiments into mind control. Beginning in the early 1950s, researchers administered LSD, barbiturates, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock, and other psychological tools, often without the consent of participants. These were military personnel, prisoners, mental health patients, and even unwitting civilians. The goal was behavioral manipulation, interrogation techniques, truth serums, and control over the mind. In 1973, attempting to erase evidence, much of the documentation was destroyed. What remained and what finally surfaced via Senate investigations in the mid-1970s revealed alarming abuses, drugging unsuspecting victims, psychological trauma, and a total absence of consent or oversight. Cold War paranoia doesn't justify this. MK-Ultra forced a reckoning on government ethics, mental health regulations, and the limits of state power in scientific research. Number 5. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. Let's shift to a psychological experiment, shorter in duration but no less notorious. In 1971, Stanford psychologist Philip Zimbardo recruited college students to play guards or prisoners in a mock jail set up in the university basement. Within days, the experiment spiraled. Guards degraded, humiliated, and punished prisoners. Emotional breakdowns, hunger strikes, and abuse followed. Originally scheduled for 2 weeks, the study was shut down after just 6 days. In recent years, critics argued that Zimbardo and colleagues encouraged guards' behavior and that participants knew more than they claimed, raising concerns about scientific validity. But the ethical breakdown remains indisputable. Participants suffered psychological harm, there was no external oversight, and the line between research and theater blurred disastrously. This experiment became a centerpiece in discussions on informed consent, psychological protection, and ethics in social sciences. Number 6. Milgram's Obedience Experiments, 1961 to 1963. Another psychology classic and ethical red flag, Stanley Milgram's Obedience Experiments. In the early 1960s, at Yale, participants were instructed to administer increasingly powerful electric shocks to an actor, the learner, when wrong answers were given. Unbeknownst to the teacher, the real subject, the shocks were fake, but the actor's screams felt real. Despite witnessing apparent agony, many participants continued delivering shocks when urged by an authority figure. Ethicists later criticized the experiment for emotional trauma, deceptive design, and lack of proper debriefing. Participants believed they were harming another person, yet the results, showing how ordinary people follow authority even against their moral qualms, were groundbreaking. Today, the study teaches caution. Scientific insight doesn't give license to emotional harm, and respect for participants must be paramount. Number 7. The Little Albert Conditioning, 1920. In 1920, behaviorist John B. Watson and his graduate assistant Rosalie Rayner conducted what's known as the Little Albert experiment. They conditioned an infant, nicknamed Albert, to fear a white rat by pairing the animal with a loud, frightening noise. The baby soon developed fear not only for the rat, but generalized the fear to other furry objects, including a rabbit and a fur coat. There was no parental consent protocol as we'd expect today, and there's little record of any effort to reverse the conditioned fear or care for Albert afterward. This isn't just outdated now, it was scandalous then. Exposing a child to emotional trauma for research without follow-up care or consent represents flagrant disregard for welfare. It's a cautionary tale reminding us that the most vulnerable must never be sacrificed in the name of discovery. Number 8. The Monster Study on Orphans, 1939. Next, the Monster Study. In 1939, at the University of Iowa, a linguistics team under Wendell Johnson attempted to induce stuttering or to cure it in a group of orphans. Fluent-speaking children were harshly criticized when they made speech errors. Stutterers were praised. The goal? To study feedback's effect on speech fluency. But the results were heartbreaking. Children who'd had normal speech started hesitating, altering speech patterns, and some developed lifelong anxieties and speech issues. The study remained unpublished. Subjects were never informed or given support. Decades later, the state compensated some victims. It underscores one of the harshest truths in research. Targeting vulnerable children with lingering psychological manipulation, with foreseeable harm and no consent, is nothing but abusive. Number 9. Facebook Emotional Contagion Study, 2012, published 2014. Now into the digital age, one experiment many of you might remember. In 2012, Facebook collaborated with researchers to tweak news feed content for nearly 700,000 users to investigate how emotions spread online. Some users saw fewer positive posts, others fewer negative ones. The result? Those who saw fewer positive updates wrote more negative posts, and vice versa. The backlash was swift. Users had not consented meaningfully to emotional manipulation. Critics called it a violation of trust, with the experiment conducted invisibly and without informed consent or ethical oversight. Facebook's defense that users agreed to terms of service didn't mitigate the moral outrage. This episode sparked widespread debate on the ethics of behavioral research at scale, especially by private corporations with immense power, raising questions about transparency, user rights, and psychological safety in the digital realm. Number 10. The CRISPR Babies, 2018. Perhaps the most recent and controversial case. In 2018, Chinese scientist He Jiankui announced that he had edited the genes of twin embryos to make them resistant to HIV by disabling the CCR5 gene. These were undeniably the world's first CRISPR babies. The news reverberated globally, and not in a good way. Scientists widely condemned the experiment as reckless, premature, and unethical. There were serious concerns about off-target mutations, long-term health, inadequate consent, and no regulatory approval. The twins' identities remain private, but the consequences are public. He Jiankui was sentenced to prison in China in late 2019 and reportedly released around 2022. This incident reignited urgent conversation about germline editing governance and ethics. The bottom line: playing with human heredity without robust safety, consensus, or ethical oversight turns innovation into irresponsibility. Ethical lessons and bigger picture. Across all 10 cases, a common thread emerges. Ethical lapses either damaged individuals or undermined public trust in science. So what do we learn? Informed consent. Participants must be told what's done, why, and how it could affect them. 2. Do no harm. Research must minimize psychological or physical risk, and ethics boards must be empowered to halt studies when harms arise. 3. Transparency and accountability. Studies, especially testing human behavior or biology, need oversight and public accountability. 4. Protect vulnerable groups. Prisoners, children, marginalized communities. They must never be exploited for data. 5. Regulatory oversight. Modern IRBs, laws, and international guidelines exist because of past harm, and they must remain vigilant. These aren't bureaucratic inconveniences, they're our shared social contract with science. From horrifying medical crimes to psychological manipulation and gene editing, these 10 experiments illustrate how curiosity without conscience can inflict lasting damage. But there's hope. Today's scientists operate with tighter ethical frameworks, public scrutiny, and a deeper respect for human dignity. If you found this exploration revealing, hit that subscribe button. We've got more deep dives ahead. Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Stay curious and always stay kind.